half the population menstruates, and the other half is very ignorant about it, finds it gross and dirty, and downplays the physical and emotional sensations girls and women have with it. If you're new to my channel, hi, I'm Laura Youngblood, and welcome to From Laura's Perspective. I post a new video essay at least once a week, and sometimes it's an essay on a political or social issue, like today's, and other times it's about movies, music, TV, literature, history, or art. If that's the kind of channel you're looking for, smash that subscribe button and ding the notification bell so that your phone goes off every time I post new content. But for now, let's get down to discussing the idea of period stigma and its roots in sexism. Period stigma, just like any social stigma, is rooted in myths and false beliefs that have been spread and that people hold about the concept of menstruation. So I'm going to go over a few of them and explain why they're just not true. The first of these is that sharks can supposedly smell a woman's period blood. Women have been told not to swim in the ocean when they're on their periods, as it makes them more prone to a shark attack. While sharks do generally have a pretty good sense of smell, they definitely cannot smell a human's period blood, let alone smell where it's coming from. And even if they could, period blood does not make them angrier or more aggressive. So if you're on your period, you're fine to swim in the ocean as long as you use a tampon or menstrual cup instead of a pad. Another myth is that if a woman has sex during her period, she can't get pregnant. While a woman's bleeding during her period, her ovaries are already starting to mature eggs for a new cycle. Therefore, it's not likely that she will ovulate, giving sperm a chance to fertilize an egg while she's menstruating. However, every woman's cycle is different, and sometimes there's some overlap between cycle phases. So even if you're on your period and don't think any eggs are ready to be fertilized, always be safe instead of sorry, and use a proper contraceptive if you're going to have sex. Moreover, yes, you can have sex during your period, just know it's going to be very messy. Perhaps one of the most harmful period myths out there is that it impedes a woman's ability to do things. It's one of the many lies spread about menstruation to shame women for it and make it seem okay to treat them unfairly. It's true that right before and while a woman is menstruating, she may have mood swings, food cravings, bloating, and cramps. But if she has a healthy uterus, these things are generally pretty manageable, and they do not make a woman too weak or too emotional to do her job, get an education, or do many of the things she normally does. In fact, getting some light exercise is actually a proven reliever for these symptoms. However, for some women, they may be riddled with an excessively heavy flow and abnormally debilitating cramps during their period, to a point at which they may need to stay home from school, take off work, or cancel other plans. This is caused by a series of potential or actual conditions known as dysmenorrhea, which literally means bad menstruation. The most common cause of dysmenorrhea is endometriosis, a condition in which uterine tissue grows outside of the uterus. If a woman believes she may have dysmenorrhea, she should seek medical attention and be taken seriously. This actually leads me to my next myth, that every woman's period is the same. Every single person with a uterus gets a period every month, but the experience is very different from one to the other. For starters, some find that the bodily changes associated with their period are very manageable, like I do, while others are riddled with the plight of dysmenorrhea, as I just discussed. But there are many other ways in which it's different for everyone as well. The average girl is 12 years old when she starts her period, but she can start as young as 8 or as late as 15. The average cycle between periods is 28 days, but it can also be longer or shorter depending on a variety of factors. But one thing's true of all periods. They are perfectly normal and natural, just so much so as eating, breathing, sleeping, or sweating. Just because period blood is a fluid that comes from the vagina, an organ that's been made socially taboo despite half the population having one, does not make it gross, dirty, or something for women to be ashamed of. They don't ask to have a monthly cycle, they can't control their flow, and they can't hold their period blood in, so it's not okay to shame them or make fun of them for it. Last but not least is the myth that young, unmarried girls cannot or should not use tampons and are only to use pads when they're menstruating. The argument for this is that tampons make you lose your virginity. Supposedly, it does this by tearing the hymen, a thin tissue right outside of your vaginal canal, which can also happen when a girl has sex for the first time. However, the hymen can also be torn by a variety of other things that aren't sex, including strenuous exercise and extreme stress. Virginity is a cultural concept, but generally speaking, virginity is not lost until you have sexual intercourse for the first time. Some argue that even if the virginity thing isn't true, it's not safe for a girl to use a tampon or menstrual cup during her first few periods. Granted, the idea may seem a little daunting since it's placed inside of her, and if it's done incorrectly, something really bad could happen. But if she reads the instructions, puts it in right, uses the minimum absorbency to control her flow, and changes the tampon every 4 to 8 hours or cup every 12 hours, then there's nothing wrong with it. If she's ready her first one and for whatever reason she wants to use a tampon or menstrual cup, there's no reason why she can't. But if she decides she'd rather wait until she's gotten used to her period, that's okay too. The way stigma always works is that sexist myths like these pervade society and are believed by everyone within it, which leads to the instatement and enforcement of all kinds of unfair rules and policies based upon them. Let's look at how that looks all around the world. Ever since biblical times, a woman's menstruation has been made a social taboo and viewed by the general public as something a woman ought to be ashamed of in the first, second, and third worlds, though the effects are much more extreme in the latter. In the Abrahamic religions of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, the religious texts preach that a woman ought to abstain from sexual intercourse during her period. This isn't pushed as hard today as it once was, but still exists as a covert idea. Historically, many Christian denominations have barred girls and women from taking communion during their periods. This is very rare today, but still sometimes happens. In Islam, menstruating women are one of the groups of people exempted from fasting during Ramadan, and they generally do not have any ritual restrictions placed on them, though they are still expected to abstain from sexual intercourse during that time of the month. So in my First Ladies video, I mentioned that I went to the Smithsonian this past summer. And there was an entire exhibit called Girlhood, which was all about the experience of growing up female in the United States. Part of this exhibit was a section on period education, or the ritual health lecture girls in the past century have been given at school in the United States, usually around 5th or 6th grade, which is the average time at which they begin puberty. There have been many videos made explaining the very basics of what it means for a girl to menstruate and what she should and should not do during her period, such as Walt Disney's 1946 short film, The Story of Menstruation, the 1953 film, Molly Grows Up, and the 1997 film, Always Growing, sponsored by Always Menstrual Pads. These period education sources were a step in the right direction, an initiative taken at a time when girls were never even told what a period was until they got their first one and they thought they were bleeding to death. These period education sources are unarguably a good alternative to that, and the aforementioned videos were very progressive at the time each was made, but they fall short, leaving many important details out, and have covert shame around the menstrual cycle embedded in them. Moreover, these videos suggest that when you get your period, it should be hush-hush, particularly from males, and the videos themselves are treated as such, leaving boys and men ignorant about the process and more likely to believe the stigma. I highly suggest you check out the Netflix documentary Period End of Sentence, which explores period stigma in rural India and initiatives being taken to help tackle it. In India and in other third world countries, particularly Africa and the Middle East, adolescent girls often miss school during their periods because they don't have access to the hygiene materials necessary to get through a school day on your period. This makes it almost inevitable that they will bleed through their clothes and someone will notice it, which does not sit well in India. In more liberal Hindu and Buddhist communities, such as among Indian Americans, the menstrual cycle is normalized, as it should be, and sometimes even celebrated. But in more conservative Hindu and Buddhist communities, women are not allowed to enter a temple or participate in religious rituals, and are not allowed to cook meals for fear that the menstruating woman will supposedly contaminate the food. In South India, however, when a Tamil girl has her first period, her relatives gather for a special ceremony to celebrate her new status. She receives gifts, a special meal is prepared for her, and the older women bathe her in a ritual bath. In rural Nepal, girls and women are subjected to a barbaric practice called Chhaupadi when they're on their periods. In this ritual, menstruating girls and women are banished to a hut or courtyard where they are to isolate themselves until they're done bleeding. Although the practice is technically illegal in Nepal, the seclusion of rural, conservative parts of the country allows it to continue. Inevitably, this forces girls and women to miss school and work, and devalues women and makes them even more socially vulnerable than they already are in Nepal. The good news, though, is that there are many people and cultures who consider a girl's first period to be a rite of passage into womanhood to be celebrated. Albeit in some contexts, this can be taken too far, and some girls are considered to be ready for marriage and family life as soon as they start their periods, which, as I mentioned earlier, happens between the ages of 8 and 15, which means that even a late bloomer isn't physically or emotionally ready to bear a child when she first menstruates. Even in countries where periods are viewed in a slightly more positive light, there's one problem that makes menstruation a real hassle for many girls and women. Pads, tampons, and menstrual cups are necessities that help girls and women maintain their hygiene, prevent leaks, and moreover, prevent infections. However, since they are products used specifically by females, and because of the insulting lies spread about menstruation, these products are taxed as luxury items, similar to toys, beauty products, and alcohol. As a result of this tax, girls and women in the first, second, and third worlds suffer from period poverty or inadequate access not only to pads and tampons, but to indoor plumbing and running water and other public sanitation measures necessary to deal with menstrual blood. This is an obvious problem in third world countries, where people have a hard enough time accessing more obvious basic necessities. But this can and does happen in more developed countries, and in this case, girls and women have a hard time getting help because they find this problem embarrassing to talk about. Families at and below the poverty line often find themselves having to make a difficult choice between menstrual products and other necessities, such as food, and the latter is generally the choice they go with. Girls in these families usually rely on products supplied by their school nurse, which only goes so far, especially when a global pandemic shuts these facilities down, like it did in the spring of 2020. As I mentioned earlier, when girls can't access these things during their periods, they miss school because of their period, posing a detriment to their education. If a girl or woman can't afford pads or tampons, she'll instead use paper, old clothes, leaves, or wool pieces, which are not adequate alternatives and can even cause infection. The good news is that there are many things that can be done, some of which are already being done, to normalize the idea of menstruation and combat period stigma. One of the first and most important things we do for this is talk openly and properly educate both boys and girls about menstruation at an early age. Like I mentioned earlier, period education videos like The Story of Menstruation were progressive for their time, but are very outdated and contain glaring inaccuracies and information gaps. Traditionally, puberty and period education is taught with boys in one room and girls in another, which is both a cause and effect of period stigma. What should happen from now on, which some schools are already doing, is to teach all of the facts about periods in a respectful and normalizing way with the boys and girls in the same room. Or at the very least, while the boys and girls are in their separate rooms, make it a point to teach the boys about periods. In addition to schools, parents and families also have an obligation to talk openly about menstruation and to do so as early as possible. These days, many parents have an initial talk with their children about the changes their bodies are going through and will go through as soon as they notice the first signs of puberty in their children. While doing this with their daughters, parents should stick to the facts, tell the whole truth about their periods and the menstrual products available to them, and call it what it is instead of using degrading code words such as Aunt Flo, time of the month, or Shark Week, just as a few examples. Just like in schools, parents should also educate their sons about menstruation and make very clear that this is a perfectly normal thing that every post-pubescent female in his life goes through, including his mother, his sister, his girlfriend, his future wife, and his future daughter. Another thing that needs to change is that schools and workplaces need to adopt policies that make it period-friendly, such as by being more flexible with bathroom breaks for students and employees who menstruate. There is already lobbying for these institutions to provide free pads and tampons to female students and employees. But more importantly, there needs to be an aura in these environments in which picking one up and taking it to the bathroom is perfectly normal, and girls and women don't feel they have to hide these products in their sleeves or pockets. Of course, this will be much easier to do if and when the tampon tax is lifted. But it will be in place as long as there are lies being spread about periods, such as that it's a matter of girls and women not being able to control their bladders. Some workplaces have even started to offer a thing called menstrual leave. Hence its name. This policy allows women to have paid time off if they're having painful cramps during their period, rather than having to suffer in silence at work. A menstrual leave policy mostly benefits the 20% of women who suffer from dysmenorrhea. However, many women oppose this idea for reasonable fear that it could lead to an uptick in hiring discrimination. Going back to the tampon tax, which is a major cause of period poverty, there are some little things you, as an individual, can do to fight it. For one, you can write letters to politicians urging them to overturn the tampon tax, and vote for politicians who seek to do this, and also in general make things easier for menstruating women. Also, many nonprofit organizations hold menstrual product drives in which they ask for donations of pads, tampons, menstrual cups, and period underwear, which they donate to girls and women experiencing poverty and homelessness. If you donate just one box to one of these, you're doing more than you think. For people in these situations, menstrual products are the #1 thing they struggle to afford, and the first thing to go when they need to make more room in their budget for things like food and shelter. So to be given adequate period products, which some girls and women like myself take for granted, for free, takes a huge burden off of them. If you don't know of any period product drives near you that you can donate to, start one of your own at your school, church, workplace, or wherever. Thank you all so much for watching. Starting menstruation is a huge change in a girl's life that should be celebrated and honored, but instead they get shamed, taxed, and lied to about this perfectly natural process. But the point I hope I've made today is that all of this is very wrong, but there is a spark of hope for things to get better and things we can do to push treatment of people who menstruate in the right direction. The same holds true for other issues that plague our society, which I've also made video essays on, and there are links to up on your screen. If you like those kinds of videos, check out my playlist, Politics, Society, and Culture. I also make video essays beyond that stuff, so go to my channel page, find the one that's right for you, smash that subscribe button, and ding that notification bell so your phone goes off every time I have something new to say in a new video.